Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to the 3.29 Early League Meta Wrap-Up. Today is 13 and a half days into patch 3.29. We've had some interesting early things that have been coming up in starts. We're going to have some interesting charts to have a look at, including this one, detailing all of the different ascendancies in the game. And you'll notice that we've got some very, very thin lines here. But even these thin lines mostly relate to pretty playable ascendancies, just ones that haven't been made interesting in a while, so people are familiar with them. They're not regarded as one of the long-term best ascendancies like Elementalist now is, or like Chieftain is, but instead they're regarded as something kind of a little bit outclassed by other things, but is good at doing something specific. And also, we've got a whole bunch of charts related to the skills that people are playing. One thing I'm really happy to see here is that other category, that's things that don't make it into the top 20, that is over 40% of the meta. I think that's a really healthy sign. I'd actually like it to be more than 50%, but I don't think I've ever seen it more than a third before, and now it's a lot more than a third. One thing I found a lot of people have been frustrated by this league, though, has been lag. It's been a bit mixed. There have been some people who've been having a really good time with lag, but I know that I've been getting moments like this one where I'm getting 10, 11 seconds of lag. So what happens is you're just running through a map, you're clearing through, everything feels fine, and then suddenly, boom, freeze. The actual cause here isn't grinding your games. This is your ISP optimizing for typical internet traffic rather than optimizing for gaming traffic. There is a solution to this, and it is GearUp. You might remember that I did a promo for them back in patch 0.5.0 of Path of Exile 2 as well. When I was preparing that video, they gave me a week's free access to trial the software, make sure that it was worth recommending, and I was so impressed that I ended up signing up for it as a paid customer. If you want a free trial, there is a link down in both the description below and the pinned post, and you'll be able to give GearUp a shot, see if it does improve your lag situation as much as it's improved mine. Of course, though, there is one drawback. Whenever I remember to use it, all of my deaths are very obviously my own fault. They're no longer something that I can blame on game lag. GearUp do also provide support to a large variety of other online live service games as well. So if you're an MMO fan or any action shooter game fan, definitely check out whether they provide support for the games that you also play. Right, so we want to talk about the methodology that we'll use here, and for those of you that are familiar with the way that I've run these videos in the past, it will be mostly the same. Grinding Games published the ladder. There's a comprehensive list of everyone in the top 15,000 characters by XP. Now, to be on this list now, you have to be level 99, but you can also have been on it in the past and no longer be on it anymore. Now, the website POE.ninja scrapes this and aggregates data on basically all the high-level characters that they're aware of. So people that are active traders, people that opt in on the website, people that have ever been on the ladder. If that's the case, you're going to end up on POE Ninja's scrape unless you opt out of it by making a character private. Now, what I do in this video is I cut off at level 97. So this means that we catch all of the level 100, most level 99 characters, and a good sweep of the characters that are level 98 and 97 currently. So this should catch a lot of players that had an early great start but have fallen off the ladder since, but it's also only really catching characters that have had a fairly successful start to their league. Otherwise, they're not going to end up on this. It's worth noting that we're going to be focusing on softcore trade, but if you do opt into any of the hard modes, you'll find generally there is more of a constraint on what your build needs to be able to do. For instance, if you have a look at solo self-found, you'll find there are even more elementalists. Elementalists are the top ascendancy in Trade League, but it's even more elementalist dominant in solo self-found because solo self-found restricts what you've got access to and rewards early power, which the elementalist excels at. And in this league, solo self-found has a little bit less build diversity than it usually does, but not by a lot. It's also important to note that popular build guides do change the meta a lot. There was a lot of hype for Winter Orb Elementalist prior to league start, with a view to transitioning over into Occultist and Winter Orb later, and this has been something a lot of players have done. Increasingly though, there are a lot of players who are not playing proven powerhouse builds, but they're looking for something new each time they play. You'll notice this when you see how much of a fall off in the popularity of slam builds there is. It's not that the slam builds are bad. It's the slam builds are just something people have kind of played them. They're really finished with them. They're really just not that interested in playing the same thing again, but you can definitely have success, and a lot of success, with a lot of the different slam builds. Something we need to discuss is the impact of new endgame content. And this league, it's not actually been very much. The Under the Sea content, we didn't know much about it going into the league. but because it doesn't place particularly high demands on your character, it's not something that is really challenging veteran players all that much. And whatever your build is, even if it's not specialized for the type of content that you find under the sea, it doesn't really matter all that much. You can do it. Now, there is a bit of an exception here, and that is true glass cannon play styles. Those builds are terrible at maps. They're terrible at doing everything except Uber Pinnacle bosses, but they absolutely excel at that, especially in softcore trade. But those builds are kind of things people make as one of multiple characters rather than as their sole character anyway. So those builds are terrible under the sea, but they're terrible in a lot of content as well. And I don't think there's much of an impact on how popular they are based upon how good or how bad they are under the sea. Grady Gear Games also did a huge overhaul of self-casting this league. So with the caster overhaul, there are a few things I wanted to point out. Caster staves, and here I'm talking about staves that do not have attack stats on them. So a caster staff is a staff that is not a war staff. These were giga buffed and few people have noticed or care. I think one of the big things here is that the unique jewel, the Red Nightmare, and it has one Foulborn variant out of 3 that exist that works for this as well. This jewel is pretty much the only way at a reasonable opportunity cost to get solid defenses on a caster that is using a staff. You absolutely can do it, but you're looking at using this 40 Divine Jewel plus a whole chunk of fire resistance tattoos. That's what you need in order to get going there. Now, it's not like you're totally squishy. You'll have seen some gameplay footage of me playing around with a fireball build before, but I do have only about 40% attack block because I have not yet set up a Red Nightmare setup on my character, which means that if I get swarmed, I'm in a bit of trouble. Shields offer casters lower DPS, but much, much, much better defenses early on. And honestly, Wand and Shield is easier to get started than a staff is. That said, staves are now way better than they used to be. The difference between the two options is big, as most explosive recovery options that you get on your character, they're found in the shield slot. Shield and Wand is now 3 gem levels behind a caster staff though, so there is a very real opportunity cost there. Ultimately, you have to make that decision for yourself. Do I want to be tankier, but do quite a bit less damage, 3 gem levels less damage, which is probably going to be about 35% less damage. It's like having an entire reduced support gem. Or do I want to end up having this burst recovery so it doesn't matter if I'm taking a lot of hits? Movement options are also another big factor here. Unless you've got Mageblood on your character, you probably want to have a shield charge setup. Shield charge is not something that you can use in conjunction with a caster staff. All in all, 1 character in 40, level 97 plus, are equipping a spellcaster staff. I am part of that 1 in 40, but most of you are not. I will say also though that with the caster overhaul, it has worked in the sense that there are quite a number of direct cast skills that have made the top 20 most popular skills this league, and they represent quite a bunch of different playstyles, but there has been a huge convergence on one in particular, and that is Winter Orb, the #1 skill of this league so far. At this point, I want to start talking about ascendancies. Now, you will notice some very, very thin lines up the top here. This is the Unfortunates. This is the Trickster, this is the Warden, and this is the Saboteur. None of them, however, are really unplayable. There's also a line that's too thin for you to see here, and that is the 5 absolute legends that have gotten an unascended character this high in level. So if you're one of those 5, round of applause to you. But when having a look here, you will see the Elementalist is 19.2% of level 97 plus characters. Then we have the Occultist at 13.2, the Luminary at 12.1. I do think with the Luminary, a big part of that is brand new and shiny syndrome. People are playing something experimental, people are playing something new, something that's cool, without it necessarily being something they're confident is going to be good, although people have found ways to make the Luminary work well. Next up is Old Reliable the Chieftain, 11.1%, Necromancer at 9.2%, and then we start doing a fairly big jump down to Slayer at 6%, and then all the ones that are less than 5% each. If it was perfectly balanced, everything would be 5%. So you get a sense that the Elementalist, Occultist, Luminary, and Chieftain in particular are taking just a little bit of the pie from everyone else. But the ones that are under 5%, we have the Deadeye, the Hierophant, the Juggernaut, the Assassin, the Gladiator, the Pathfinder, the Champion, the Inquisitor, the Reliquarian, the Ascendant, the Guardian, and the Berserker. And then the 3 that are genuinely in a little bit more trouble after that. I think the first thing to say about the Ascendancy spread, though, is that all of the unpopular Ascendancies actually do have a coherent game plan. All of them can make very functional builds. For example, Berserker. Berserker is played about 1% at the moment. If there was a race event on tomorrow, Berserker would be one of the things that might well win it. The thing is, lots of people play the Berserker Slam archetype and just aren't that interested in playing it again. Elementalist is shining brighter than everyone else though, despite having had a couple of nerfs over recent leagues. So some of you that have played a bit longer might remember that there was one league where the Elementalist Golem node was giving 100% Golem effect. There was also a period when Primordial Bond was better than it is now. All these nerfs have not taken the wind out of the Elementalist sails. In fact, the Elementalist is still doing incredibly well. I think a big factor here is spellcaster mana. Other builds need to make sacrifices somewhere to address mana. The Elementalist, though, the Elementalist gets a lot of it stapled onto a golem they were going to use anyway. So you've got a golem that's providing you with cast speed and mana at the same time, and this mana recovery is really, really significant. So you'd be using this just for the DPS aspects of the cast speed, but on top of that, you're getting the equivalent of a very high level clarity for free. This thing is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly strong. And honestly, I think it is the primary reason that the Elementalist is so popular early on. It just solves so many problems for you, and especially because the Elementalist provides you with unconditional damage percent, damage over time multiplier, chaos resistance, cast speed, and mana recovery per second. You're getting all of these things for very, very little investment. And whilst you can eventually outscale them with other gear options on other classes, it ends up just being incredibly good all the way through the endgame. Now, in the past, one thing that we've seen a lot is that things look a lot different at level 95, 97, 98, 99, and 100. This league, there is a little bit of a difference, but it is still the same 5 ascendancies that are in the top. And the only difference is that number 2 and number 4 swap when you start looking at level 100 instead of level 97. Chieftain is in number 4 and Occultist is in number 2 if you look at 97. But if you were to jump up to level 100, those two do a switcheroo. 1, 3, and 5 stay the same as they are. Now, a big reason here is that Chieftain's tankiness is something that is both good at helping you get to level 100, but it's also something that those who know they want to reach level 100 really appreciate, and therefore they're more likely to bias in favor of choosing the Chieftain as well. That said, number 1 position for level 100 characters is the Elementalist. Even though the Chieftain is doing well here, it's not quite enough to dethrone the Elementalist, which is still at the top overall. I think one thing that might be helping a bit is the fact that there's not tremendous defensive pressure coming from the 3.29 exclusive content. So that's not pressuring you to build a giga tanked character. And that means that Elementalist just having an all-around package, you're still not dying all that often. You're still able to reach level 100 just fine. Whereas if the new content was a bit rippier, then the people that are playing Elementalist might either not play it at all, or might alternately say, you know what, I'm just going to stay at 99. The next thing I want to focus on is build diversity when it comes to skill selection, because this is the spot where the build diversity from an Ascendancy perspective has been pretty normal this league. But there's been a couple of real steps forward when it comes to build diversity on skill use. There are a couple of outperforming things at the moment, but there are just so many things that are getting moderate use at the moment. For example, I am one of 112 people who are using Fireball on high-level characters at the moment. That's just because I've really had a lot of fun with the skill. It's stayed fun longer than I was expecting. It's not necessarily a complete powerhouse, but it is definitely good enough to get the job done, and it's just a really satisfying and fun skill to use. One thing I do need to say though, there are some skills where it's a bit unclear as to what your main skill is. For example, you might be a build that is using Righteous Fire to kill trash monsters, using Hinekora Death's Fury explosions from the Chieftain Ascendancy to kill tankier monsters, and using Scorching Ray of Immolation as a backup to kill really tanky monsters when you don't have access to adds that you can Hinekora Boom next to them. In that case, I'm going to be using my own judgment to assess what they actually are and what the identity of that build is as it's known by the Path of Exile community. So that build would be termed Righteous Fire, even though it is also using either Scorching Ray of Immolation, if they're interested in using new tech, or if the player is just interested in going with old reliable tech, they might instead be using Fire Trap as their supplementary damage. That still works, and I'm still categorizing it as a Righteous Fire build, but ultimately, there's a little bit of a judgment call here, and you will see this if you jump over to POE.ninja. You'll notice a couple of skills that I don't include here, and that's because I've categorized them some other way. So here's what it looks like when we take a chart. We have Winter Orb in first position, and you can see it's a pretty solid chunk here. Then another chunk for Righteous Fire, Penance Brand, Vaal Reap, Raise Spectre, and then we're starting to get to really thin slices already. In fact, no more slices are even as wide as 3% from here until we get to this other. And other here is everything that doesn't make it into the top 20. So what I'll do now is go through those top 20 with a heavier focus on the ones that are at the top. And then after that, I'll just mention that there are just so many more things that are out there for you to explore, because things that are currently in the 21 to 50th range, they're actually quite often as good or even sometimes better than things that make it into the top 20 or even the top 10. So skill diversity. The fact that we've got 40% of players playing things that are outside the top 20 is a really, really positive sign. I don't think we've ever had 40% before. I think it's usually in the 20 to 30% range in recent times. And if you go way, way, way back, so we're talking the Seismic Trap oppressively good era, or even further back to the period where Carrion Golems was oppressively good in Blight League, or in 3.7 Legion League when we had Cyclone Slayers everywhere, skill diversity looked very different then. We take a look at this chart. If we were to go back to Legion, back in Legion, the number of people who were playing just Cyclone was 49%. So basically everything down here, you're looking at something like the top 13 builds of the current league all combined. That was a percentage of people who were playing Cyclone in that league. And of course, there's also other builds that were taking up a fair bit of the rest as well. So Grinding Gear Games have got a lot of things into a spot where they're serviceable, but there are a couple of things that do stand out over and above the rest. We also have representation from a lot of different playstyles here, although I think there's one very important one that we're almost missing at the moment, at least based on historic Path of Exile 1 build metas. So we have representation from ranged attack. We have wand attack builds. We have one singular bow build in the top section. We have damage over time skills. We have self-cast. We have melee. We have totems. We have minions. And just outside of the top 20, we have mines and traps as well. However, what is not doing very well at the moment is triggered skills. We do have cast when stun builds, sometimes Chieftain, sometimes Gladiator. They're doing okay, but all of the other things like cast on critical strike is not looking very well at the moment. Cast while channeling, not looking very popular at the moment. And really, a lot of the changes Grinding Gear Games made to channeling this league haven't really landed that well either. So those are the sections that I think are doing worse. But in general, I think this might be the most skill diversity we've had, alongside just a typical level of Ascendancy diversity this league. So let's start with Winter Orb. Winter Orb, 12.9% of you are playing this on level 97 plus characters, and this skill was gigabuff this league. Early on, it looked like it was just going to crush build diversity this league. However, it is not. 13% of the meta is not a bad spot for the top skill to be in. It's definitely performing well. Some people love the playstyle, some people loathe it. Personally, I know I dislike this skill. I have never had fun with this skill, and therefore I felt no urge to go back to it. It is played in two main ways. There is an Elementalist version, there is an Occultist version. Now, this is not one of those cases where there are two Ascendancies that pretty much do the same thing. Here, the Occultist is all focused on stacking power charges. The Elementalist is not interested in stacking power charges. The Elementalist version is easier to get started, but has a lower ceiling. The Occultist version, it is the better build ultimately, but it is going to have a much harder time getting you to level 95, getting you your first 15 divines. Once you get it going though, I do believe that the Occultist version is probably going to end up being the best build of this league. So definitely keep that in mind. One of the advantages here though is that because the Elementalist and the Occultist are the same base class, if you want to try out the Winter Orb playstyle, you can just start it, and you can start it as an Elementalist, and then once you've got enough gear together, you can say, you know what, now I can make that big switch, go and run one Labyrinth so that you can swap Ascendancy, and suddenly you're an Occultist, put on your power charge stacking gear, completely different playstyle, completely different scaling vectors, slightly better build. And that ability to go from 0 to hero on the same build is something that is really, really popular as well. So Winter Orb, top performing skill for a good reason. I personally detest this skill's playstyle. I have no interest in playing it myself, but a lot of you disagree with me, and I think it's good that there's things that cater to different playstyles there. Next up is Righteous Fire. Now, 8.4% of you are playing this. The reason that some people have gone back to Righteous Fire this league is because Scorching Ray of Immolation is really good now. You're not required to use it. You can still go with Fire Trap like Righteous Fire players often did in the past, but one of your biggest weaknesses has been reduced. And that is that it is absolutely and utterly crushing to get a couple of specific bosses down on Righteous Fire builds. The Maven's the absolute worst of them. The Maven is one of those bosses that for most Ascendancies, you just need mediocre gear to get it down. With Righteous Fire, you need to both have quite good gear and also play quite well, because the Maven has a number of nasty things associated with her that really do not play well with a Righteous Fire character. Notably, a lot of your defense on this character is as a result of recovery, and the Maven has ways of shutting off your recovery. This archetype has an outstanding guide, it's a popular playstyle, it's very tanky, and this combination makes for a popular archetype. It does need a secondary fire skill, and usually people historically used Fire Trap. Nowadays, Scorching Ray of Immolation is really good. But honestly, I feel this build is more defined by the fact that it is a Hinekora Death's Fury Ignite build. Hinekora Death's Fury being the explosion notable that is found on the Chieftain Ascendancy. That honestly defines the archetype more than Righteous Fire does. And that's the reason that this build can go into certain maps where the recovery is nerfed and can just function as a Scorching Ray of Immolation build and can actually function quite well. Because Hinekora Death's Fury is there to turn your enemies into popcorn when turning them into popcorn would be funny for you. After that, we have Penance Brand. Now, there are multiple versions of Penance Brand that have been popular over time. When I say Penance Brand, a lot of you might be thinking of instant application critical strike damage builds that are Penance Brand of Dissipation. That is not what we're talking about today. Those PBOD builds have been very good in the past. They're still very serviceable now, but it is the classic Penance Brand skill, and this is being used as an Ignite application method. So this is Penance Brand Ignite on the Elementalist, almost always on the Elementalist, and at endgame, this is one of the builds that makes the best use of the super powerful Breachlord exclusive ring, Herald of the Hive. Now, this comes from a vendor recipe. It's pretty hard to access if you're playing in solo self-found. It's very accessible in Trade League, and this is a very powerful shell to play around with Herald of the Hive if you've never done so before. In fact, at some point during this league, I will definitely swap over to the Penance Brand plus Herald of the Hive setup on my character in this league. After this, we have Vaal Reap. Now, this is physical damage over time Elementalist. So this uses the Elementalist Golem package, where you've got the Flame Golem providing you with percentage increased damage, and you've got the Chaos Golem providing you with percentage dot multi, and you've also got the Chaos Golem providing you with Chaos Rares, and you've got a whole bunch of other good stats coming from your Golems. This is the core of the package, and then you use the fact that Reap received a couple of new options this league. Reap was always playable, but you have the option of Reap of Butchery if you want to go into that. Not everyone that is playing the Reap package is actually playing Reap of Butchery. Some of you prefer the OG. There's no wrong or right answer to this. Both of them work, and it's something like a 55-45 split in favor of the new transfigured version. Both of these are really solid, and this is going to scale physical damage over time. It always uses Corrupting Fever, and it has good damage application as well as reasonable damage when it needs to deal intense damage to one target. After that, we're going to jump down to something else that is primarily played on the Witch, but this time we're not going to be an Elementalist, we're not going to be an Occultist, we're going to be a Necromancer. Raise Spectre. Now, Raise Spectre is many builds in one, because there are as many Spectre builds as there are things that you can raise as Spectres. Or maybe not quite all of them, because there are some that are head and shoulders above the rest, but here we're talking about builds that are running a 6-link Raise Spectre. We're not really interested in builds that are primarily doing something else, but they happen to have an unlinked Raise Spectre in their build because of buff that they can get from it. We're talking here about people who invest really heavily in making their Spectres good. The thing is that there's a number of different ways that you can build this. So they're almost always played on the Necromancer, but some of them are actually builds that make attacks with other minions as well, and then their Spectres are there to buff those minions. So there's a lot of different possibilities here if you're interested in exploring them. Now, there is one important caveat that needs to be raised here, and that is that not all of these are truly Raise Spectre specialists. Some of these will be characters that are using their Spectres as cheerleaders while they do something else. It's actually quite hard to spot that when you're looking at the data. You can't get all of the details of it. and that makes it quite difficult to work out exactly what's going on here. Exactly what setup these characters are using is impossible to tell. Likewise, that's going to come up as a difficulty when we look at Animate Guardian, which makes it into position 6. So this again is heavily linked, heavily invested Animate Guardian. We're not talking about people who just have an Animate Guardian along as a cheerleader while they're doing their thing and their Animate Guardian is just in a 2 or 3 or 4 link setup. This is things where it's been 5 or 6 links, so there's quite a bit of dedication to making it better. Animate Guardian centric builds were very different last league. When transfusion support existed in 3.28, there was an Animate Guardian of Smiting build that used the Animate Guardian as a combat minion. I don't think that's working so well this league, and the main reason for that, of course, is that transfusion support is legacy. So if you've got one in standard, you can keep playing it there, but you can't get any new ones of them in 3.29. Position 7 is Kinetic Bolt of Clustering. Now this is played on the Hierophant, and whilst you could conceivably play this through totems, and as soon as people mention that you've got the Hierophant, people are thinking, oh, that's a 1 totem build, right? No, this is a mana stacking aspect of the Hierophant, and it is overwhelmingly not played in conjunction with attack totems, although there are some things that people are playing with attack totems a little bit further down the list. Kinetic Blast is next, and that is mostly played as kind of 2 different builds. Actually, they're roughly equal in popularity. You got the Deadeye version and you've got the Juggernaut version. The Juggernaut version is strength and accuracy stacking. The Deadeye version is just making direct attacks. Ethereal Knives comes up next, and this is being played on 2 different builds again. There's an Elementalist and a Chieftain version. Very important note here, this is not Ethereal Knives of the Massacre. That will also make it onto this list. It's just a little bit further down. And finally, we have Cyclone Void Shockwave. Now, this is played overwhelmingly on the Slayer. I am calling this Void Shockwave builds. This is builds that are using Cyclone or Cyclone of the Tumult in order to trigger the Void Shockwave support gem, or for players that don't yet have access to that gem, they will trigger Shockwave support instead. And this is a character that often uses a 2-handed weapon. Void Shockwave has a bit more flexibility in weapons. Classic Shockwave is pretty much forced into using a 2-handed staff. So that rounds out the top 10. When we have a look at the rest of the top 20 though, you're going to see a couple of things here that are very, very well-known builds. We have Flicker Strike, mostly played on the Slayer. We have the Chieftain or Gladiator Cast When Stunned package. So it's mostly played on the Chieftain, but the Gladiator is real too. And this is something that is marked by using Cast When Stunned linked to Detonate Dead of Scavenging. Almost always that combination is found on these builds. 13th position is Animate Weapon of Ranged Arms, almost always played on the Necromancer. 14th is Lightning Arrow, primarily played on the Deadeye. 15th is Ethereal Knives of the Massacre. Now this is played on the Elementalist and the Chieftain, but the interesting thing here is that this is fundamentally a Golden Charlatan / Headhunter build. So this is one of the few builds that absolutely positively does not want Mageblood. It's got some plans for something else there. This is something that is for juiced mapping, and it is actually not a very strong build at all when it comes to killing bosses, but it doesn't need to be. It's specialized in any map that has a lot of density of rare monsters. I expect this one might go up over time. The Golden Charlatan is the rarest drop from one of the more challenging of the Uber Pinnacle bosses, so whilst there are plenty of them around, there'll be more over time. 16th position is the build that was number 1 last league, Kinetic Fusillade on the Hierophant. Now this is actually still the totem build. Kinetic Fusillade can be played as direct attack, but almost no one is doing so. It is still very much coming from Ballistae instead. The next one down, 17th position, is Static Strike of Gathering Lightning, almost always played on a Slayer. I've heard so many good things about this build. It is something that I would recommend having a look into if it sounds interesting. Something that people are generally saying is really, really solid. 18th, we have the item source skill Death's Oath, or Death Aura as it's actually called the skill. This is something that's primarily played on the Occultist. It got gigabuffed in this league because the new Legion Vestigal Unique system is extremely good in conjunction with Death's Oath. After this, Holy Relic of Conviction, played as a poison build on the Necromancer, is incredibly strong. This is one of those sleeper builds. One of those things that's been incredibly strong for a long period of time. There's just not that much hype around it, but it is very good. And then in 20th, we have Elemental Hit on the Slayer, which took a pretty smashing nerf over the last end of league. When it comes to Breakout Uniques this league, the biggest one is Cinderswallow Urn. Cinderswallow Urn has gone up tremendously in popularity. It's always been a fairly good item, it's always been fairly popular, but it has exploded to be the most popular flask in the game, as of the current day. There are also appreciably more Magebloods in circulation than there were this point into Mirage League, which might surprise people with all the discussion that's been happening around loot. So you'll see that there are both more Magebloods and Foulborn Magebloods. They're being equipped. And additionally, on top of that, Mageblood is something that, because it's so expensive, people who own it, they pretty much always get equipped by someone. Not necessarily the person that loots it, but it'll end up getting traded to someone else who will wear it. So if you're playing a Golden Charlatan build and you have no interest in Mageblood to equip yourself, you're not just going to sit on one in your inventory. If you own one, it's in circulation, someone will buy it off you, and they will end up equipping it instead. So basically all the ones that exist are being equipped at the moment, or they're actively for sale on asynchronous trade, and that was the same at this point in Mirage League as well, but there are simply more of them in circulation. The other thing that's exploded in popularity this league has been Ralakesh's Impatience. While the endurance charge version of this is good, it is the power charge version that is extremely good. It has, however, come down in price. There was a period where it was dozens and dozens of divines. It is now available very much in the single figures. So if you want to go and get one, it's quite affordable by the time that you start getting solidly into endgame. And that concludes my tour of the 3.29 meta so far, 13 and a half days into the league. Once more, thanks to today's video sponsor, GearUp. I tried them out in Mirage League after just having way too many XP losses to network spikes. And I have a policy of turning down sponsors that I think offer junk services. The amount that I've been offered by various game cheating sites would actually shock you, I think. But GearUp has been something that I've been quite happy to deal with because they have been very good in my own experience. Their help is the reason I've been able to spend 2 days preparing this video rather than trying to compress it all into about 6 or 7 hours like I otherwise would feel the pressure to do. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results.